Recording. One sec.
Recording is on.
Welcome to the governance discussion for December 9th, 2020 for Dxdow. So just to go over the agenda briefly, on the governance 1.0 front, going over some of the funding and proposals in the queue. And then there's also a couple ENS public resolver proposals, and then touching on Swapper, kind of the governance side of things and what to expect there in terms of proposals going forward. And then talk briefly about Pulp Machina's worker proposal, some of the feedback. I think it'd be good to have some of the feedback on the scope, given that the the worker proposal focuses on some governance things. And then maybe a little repeat of Monday, but if we wanted to touch on onboarding, I think Keenan had some good thoughts there. And then on the 1.x stuff, I know there's been some, I think there's one proposal now in the X side, Dxdow, for community competition for Omen markets, so touching on that. And then if we have time, I think it's probably more appropriate for tomorrow, but there has been some good discussion, I think, on DX fractalization or kind of squads and how they should form. Cool. And so just starting on the worker proposals, just to kind of give an idea of what's out there, there's several different worker proposals. I know one from Ingemar that's on September and October compensation, and then some from Federico, Caden, and a bunch of others. There are two separate Swapper relayer audits. And so this is the relayer that will allow Dxdow to provide liquidity to Swapper. And so this has been audited, I think, already. And so there's the first fee proposal is about to expire today. And then the second one was just kind of submitted and boosted and will go through 6 days. And then there's also a Gnosis protocol relayer audit payment that actually just got put in there. And so again, that's for Dxdow to be able to interact with Gnosis protocol and be able to like sell tokens or something. And so that's been, Nico had been working on that. And so that's now ready. I think it's being audited now. And so there's a proposal there. And then, yeah, and then there were kind of two proposals, one for Omen, one for Rails, that are just kind of updating and new releases that are I think just got boosted today, and we'll kind of go forward. So that's kind of the current queue. I don't know if anyone had any thoughts, comments, or kind of concerns on any of the proposals that are out right now.
Regarding the audit proposals, I would just add that we do talk about it a decent amount on the dev call, and it's, I think, pretty well understood on the product team, but it's definitely on my kind of to-do list to do a better job of surfacing the existing audits that have been delivered. I think like compiling them somewhere on the landing page will be something that gets done. And also it's on me to do a little bit better job, I think, on making clear what the schedule is coming up. This is really just a function of me being a little bit backlogged. But on the dev side, I think everybody has had great feedback on Phil's work on the audits, and he's found some pretty critical things. And so I think everybody should be pretty happy with the work that he's been doing. And I think it's top notch and at a relatively like a competitive price, especially if you look at comparison to some of the more brand names things. It's much more affordable, but I think you're getting as good a quality there compared to like an Open Zeppelin or Sigma Prime. So yeah, look for more on that soon.
Yeah, and I think that's a kind of a good example. Maybe it hasn't gotten as much credit as it has, but I mean, auditing is a very competitive market right now, and we have, I think, a pretty good relationship with, as you said, top-notch auditor. And I think I would say that at least the governance process has worked a bit in being able to kind of maintain that relationship over the last couple of months as he audits. I know Swapper, and then I think he's done some governance stuff too, and Gnosis protocol, this one there. So it's really, I think, helpful to have an auditor that has a lot of familiarity with the contracts that are there. And so just kind of as a meta point, it is, Phil has worked as a contractor with Dxdow for, as long or longer than some of the full-time workers. So I think there are other types of ways that people can contribute positively to Dxdow without kind of being as engrossed in the day-to-day. And so I think we should be open to those more. But I think the auditing is something that we're really fortunate to have, I think, over the coming months, because I know that that's kind of a big holdup for most projects now.
Yeah, there's definitely, from what I have heard, a backlog with audits, and so some people are having to wait now in this environment too. Prices go up and stuff. So yeah, it's definitely a valuable relationship from my perspective.
What's interesting is that's another. We've had a couple examples of Dxdow hiring really like a third-party service, right? But what you realize is, and that's something that can grow, right? Like Dxdow can hire people to do anything in the world, really, like whatever it is. But in the audit case, without John being like this really important in between the DAO and the external party, it wouldn't have gotten done, right? And then we've hired the DAO has hired BlackRock to do something, but in those cases, there was little interest of that third party to like get involved on their own. Now they're quite interested in what's going on, but they're not like, I want to work for the DAO, I want to do a project, I want to earn rep, right? They provide a service, and you have this in-between person that allows that service to happen. So I think we can do more of those types of things, but we definitely, I think without the in-between link, it's hard to get those things done. But just keep that in mind, like for future examples of that, basically.
Yeah, I completely agree. Cool. Any other thoughts on proposals out or? Cool. And then switching to Swapper updates. And so we've had kind of Swapper has been development for a while now, and there's been kind of a separate process to figure out how to kind of deploy it and update it, since this is kind of the first time that the Dxdow is owning and governing at the smart contract level. So there was a proposal last week, and then there will be kind of some more proposals. And John, I don't know if you wanted to kind of provide an update on how these proposals are working and how we're kind of doing as trying to
right. So
advance the capabilities.
Yeah. So there is the funding proposal to fund and authorize the deployer for the Swapper core contracts. And I think this provides a good opportunity to talk a little bit more broadly about why that proposal exists and like what the, kind of the idea was there with that proposal. And I actually just made a post about this, which I linked to here. I talked also a bit about this on the developer call yesterday. But like at the core of this is, how do DAOs actually deploy stuff and own stuff, right? I think, and I actually think Dxdow is leading the way in this regard. I think most projects are kind of doing it in a very traditional sense of, somebody owns it, they own a URL. If you see a .finance or a, whatever people are using now, then that's like somebody owns that, right? It's centralized, it's an individual at a company or something, and they just, do the deployments themselves and whatever, they have the authorization through the company. But with a DAO, we don't it's just not really acceptable to have an individual with that kind of power over an asset, right? Like you're not gonna give me or Chris like the power to control Omen or Mesa, right? Like that's owned by the DAO. And so the DAO needs to like come to consensus with the control over these key kind of product assets, right? So how does that actually work? And like, I think people are probably familiar with these ENS proposals, right? So the primary way, or the way in which, well, I'll say the primary way in which Dxdow controls its like products is through the ENS domain. So if you take Omen or Mesa or any of our products, right? Like the way it works is the Dxdow owns an ENS address, like the actual avatar address, like the same one that controls that has the treasury funds and everything, actually owns ENS addresses. So if you go to like app.ens and you look, you can see the whole list of addresses owned by Dxdow. And then through proposals, you can actually update what's called the content hash field on these EMS names. And so actually when you go to these IPFS gateways or like the .link gateway, or you use MetaMask and you go to the EMS address, what it's doing is checking that content hash and actually resolving to the value of that, which is what we do is we set it to an IPFS hash. So basically you take the deployment of the DApp, you like deploy it on IPFS, you pin it there, and you get this hash that represents and points to that deployment. That gets set through a proposal on EMS, and voila, like you have a site now that's updated, and that is like how Dxdow exercises control. So yeah, that's exactly how we've deployed everything so far. Now there's what I go into in this post is a little bit of a nuance here in distinguishing between products that are purely front end for Dxdow and products which are both a front end DApp and a smart contract protocol. So for the most part, Dxdow owns front end DApps. Like Omen is purely a DApp front end that uses Gnosis's conditional token framework. Mesa is a front end DApp that uses Gnosis's Gnosis protocol. And Rails is a front end that uses Loopring's ZK rollup, right? So these are all like interfaces leveraging like existing smart contracts that Dxdow like did not deploy or own the smart contracts in these cases. Now the bonding curve is actually unique about this in this regard because it's actually a smart contract, right? That was deployed for the Dxdow, and that the Dxdow actually owns at like the smart contract level, and there's a connection there, right? Like the bonding curve sending ETH to the treasury, the address actually, the avatar address actually owns that contract and can like actually do things with that bonding curve, right? But the deploy process for that bonding curve, the way it was done, and I go into this in this post, is like was just how we do all these other ones that are purely front ends, which is fine. It works. Like you go and you get a proposal to update the EMS, and you can go check the smart contracts are right and everything, right? Whoever's doing the proposal has to like kind of pull all that together. But there's room to improve here because really like there's kind of a gap there if you're doing everything at once. I think what we're trying to shoot for, or want to shoot for in my view, is approve smart contracts first, then do the DApp. And like I talk about, for example, with the bonding curve, what happened is there was a proposal to update the DApp. And this was the first time anybody knew that like the smart contracts were deployed. I'm sorry, did somebody say something? Yeah, let me know if there's anything unclear, but this is a little bit long. But so that proposal was the first time anybody knew the smart contracts were deployed. And it was fundraising, right? So there's like, think of IDOs, like there's an incentive to get in earlier, right? So people saw these smart contracts and this proposal to like deploy it, the DApp, and were like, okay, they can now actually deposit money in here, but the DAO actually hadn't authorized it yet, right? So there's this like sort of conundrum as like a potential investor in the Dxdow that should you go in now and like hope that this does pass and like take the, or are you risking that it doesn't pass and then your money's like lost in this thing that wasn't the real thing? So we can improve on this by actually doing the smart contracts first. And so that's exactly what this deployer proposal was about. It was about authorizing deployment of the smart contracts for Swapper before the DApp proposal. And Augusto did this great job of like creating this deployer contract. And the way the authorization is done is basically the deployer contract waits to get Ether from the DAO through a funding proposal, and then that changes its state to be able to deploy all the Swapper smart contracts. Now, there wasn't actually an issue though here with this proposal. It passed, which is great. 25% I think was in favor for it. But if you actually go to the proposal and try to execute it, it fails. And this was a big surprise to everyone because we had Swapper contracts were audited. We did a bunch of testing on RinkB. We've been simulating things. And the reason it's actually failing is because this deployer contract is leveraging a fallback payable function. I'm getting a little technical here, but essentially it doesn't have enough gas to do what it's supposed to do. Despite the fact that it's just accepting ETH from the DAO, it literally can't do that because it doesn't have enough Ether to pay that gas due to like how Solidity works and the fact that this gas amount is fixed. We'll actually preparing a post that may probably be ready today to kind of go into the technical details of what happened here. The good news is it doesn't delay things really for Swapper because as soon as the DApp is released, which I think is pretty close, the traditional kind of the approach that we use for the bonding curve can be used here. It's just not what we were trying to do. Like we kind of came up a little short on what we were trying to do here, but I think this is a good opportunity to kind of like talk about it more and like refine it so that it works next time and next time actually get this sequence going where it's like smart contracts first, then DApp. If that makes sense. Does that make sense? Do people have questions on that? Any?
Yeah, it seems like the challenge, I like when the bonding curve, it's a good example. It's like, how can Dxdow authorize a smart contract before anyone else can use it, right? And not, not to bring up Andre, right? But of course now, like as soon as Andre or anyone like deploys a contract, people are pouring into it. And so I think it would be like nice to be able to have some way of the DAO be able to like decide when that happens. I don't think it's very important for Swapper because there's not really like a get in early type of component there. But I think this is just like an important way that we can kind of think about how Dxdow can kind of control or manage its assets well.
And I think what's interesting about this process as well is like Dxdow can hire developers from anywhere in the world and they can deliver software. And then, once they deliver it, also anybody from anywhere, any community member can make a proposal to Dxdow with the deployment. So it's literally open to the entire world. And, this could be anonymous people doing it for the DAO or whatever. So I think it really like creates this decentralized aspect that's really powerful for Dxdow. And yeah, I believe this is going to be setting an example, and that before long, like every DAO will be on the same page as us, and we're kind of trailblazing here. But that's my take on it, anyways.
Yeah, and of course, another angle here I think is Radical, right? And having like the decentralized GitHub that could also plug into this process there. So I think this is cool stuff. And so just for like timeline, so the next thing that we'll should expect is a proposal to authorize the DApp once that's kind of finalized, and then from there it'll be 5 days for the ENS resolver scheme before that's done. And so I think that's about the same timeline as John said, because it doesn't affect that. And so yeah, hopefully by next week that'll be passed.
Right, exactly. Like the good thing is it doesn't impact the Swapper timeline because like the 2 steps, we can kind of go back to the 1-step process instead. Yeah. And like I said, we'll have a post up probably today, kind of going into the technical details of that and laying out the options. I mean, the community could like decide to go back to try to redo it, but I think for timeliness sake, I imagine that won't happen, and whatever the faster approach would probably make more sense, but that'll all be clear soon.
Cool. And then just kind of moving on. So I'm not sure if anyone had seen it, but there was a work proposal from Pulp Machina to kind of help on some of these governance issues. We had put in the worker, when we were looking for workers, one of the items was kind of governance ambassador, and someone I think could kind of document these things a bit better. Part of that was other governance systems kind of interacting, but I think as we've seen, there's a lot of kind of capabilities that we'd like to be able to like document better. And this is something that I wish I had kind of more time to do, but I think Pulp has had some good thoughts on some of these, and I'm hoping that we can yeah, we can kind of find something there. I do think, as we discussed last week, there is some different components because this is pseudonymous, and so I think just wanted to kind of bring the worker proposal out more in the open to see if anyone had any kind of questions on that would be the first thing. And then the second thing is, if you look at the proposal scope, there are some kind of recommendations for different areas that we should be working on and kind of to document. And I had laid out a couple Pulp had laid out a couple, and I had laid out a couple in response. I'd also be interested to see if anyone had any like general ideas on where we should be kind of working and documenting on this. So Pulp, I don't know if you wanted to kind of add anything and maybe kick off the discussion on what type of improvements or things that we can kind of or suggestions from people that you may be looking for that we can kind of start to work on.
Yeah, thank you, Chris. So the main things that were outlined at this point in the proposal were more research-based information regarding voting trends. Something that we had looked at a bit, but want to look at maybe a bit more, but work on is definitely prioritization of proposals and trying to streamline things that need to be voted on chain, but maybe are not huge controversial or huge strategic issues that we want to really get full opinions from the community. I mean, everything's an opinion from the community, but really try to get full voter engagement. Or maybe, as I think Nylon's mentioned a few times, work on getting more signaling off-chain so that when proposals are passed with lower voter engagement on-chain, we have some direct correlation there to show what the community consensus was regarding those issues. That's something that I know Chris has mentioned to us and something we'd definitely like to work on. Another, and we list quite a few areas of interest regarding kind of research. And yeah, please, feel free to take a look at those, but just common things that are brought up during our discussions here during the governance call and on the forums. Another one, I think it's a lot of streamlining and internal communication is the main goal, just to make workers and the community understand what's going on as far as expectations with governance and where to find governance related questions and to clarify those questions. Just an example of something that's not so research based, that's something that we definitely want to update and maybe work with Keenan on. I know he's been working on some onboarding and worker proposal related issues, would be clarifying some of the information in the worker proposal outline, kind of specifying some things that, maybe are a little bit ambiguous. Everything from, when you cap, it's going to happen more and more often as the organization grows, but once you cap out on DXD, or not DXD, I'm sorry, on your rep, you may be able to use DXD compensation. How much is that? What's the community think about that? That's a very small example, but just all those points of ambiguity that would make it easier for everyone just to have some clarity on. And aside from that, definitely continue to update on research regarding what other DAOs are doing and work on the flat governance structure that decentralization the DAO wants to promote. But yeah, really interested in suggestions and feedback on the proposal.
I would be interested to hear, since this is like a two part-time proposals, do you both have full-time jobs?
No, or I'm sorry, we're co-owners of a business based in Europe. So that's why we are splitting the position 50-50, because we felt that would make the most sense based on our particular areas of experience. To kind of, as we've been doing, collaborate on the work, and that would be the fairest way going forward to, allocate time to the position. So each of us would be putting 20 hours a week. We work from home now, so it would just be a continuous process of working from home.
Okay,
previously, great. I'm still a licensed attorney in the United States, but I live in Europe now and I own my own business. I had a more than full-time job in the United States, which is, where all my experience was garnered from. And my partner is trades with capital, mainly crypto.
What other DAOs do you want to especially monitor?
Maker, I think, is really interesting. Obviously, what's going on with Genosis and the futurarchy, I think, is very, very interesting. And otherwise, I think it's just going to be more research, not just regarding DAOs, but also regarding other forms of governance systems that can be pulled from.
Yeah. Okay. That sounds super interesting. Will you create like almost like a short paper on these findings?
Well,
I'm just specifically interested like in anything that we could publish and that would maybe provide like a little bit of visibility for Dxdow.
well, that would be something we'd be very interested in working on with the whole community. And definitely very comfortable with pulling from academic scholarship to support anything we want to talk about as a case study. We can even pull from our own statistics, but that's really up to, I think that would be, in my experience, aside from all of the kind of HR, quote unquote, tasks that we need to accomplish, that would be something that we would do over a 6-month period, and that would be with some focus. So it wouldn't be an immediate thing. And then, from there, you can actually, there's a lot of different ways you can, publish it via Medium, but we could also shop it around to journals in the United States. I actually worked for a law journal while I was in law school and picked articles out. So that process usually takes like another year before you can get published, but all really cool stuff that if you're interested in it.
Okay.
That's a cool idea, I think, the research.
Yeah, definitely.
Just thinking on that, because I have been thinking after Gov 2.0 that will kind of be a way for us to push forward another narrative and kind of explain Dxdow's governance. I think that'll be an opportunity with that. And I think this would kind of be separate and more like a research, kind of, I don't really know exactly what, more like a research overview and maybe even like intended for, it's just like maybe a non-crypto audience. But I do think that type of material would be good. Having said that, that's, I don't know if you can do that in 1 month and kind of doing that. I do think there's like a natural way where we evolve things that we've built on. And I think like the worker compensation guidelines that you said were kind of a great example of this, and how we kind of at the beginning put down the bare bones, like what can we kind of all agree on? And then we have a couple months of doing that. And then it's like, okay, well, where are we at now? How can we kind of improve on that? So I think that's like a natural thing that we should try to do. And I think that's I think that's a good area. I do think it's a little, I think as kind of Christopher and I are both thinking, we're kind of thinking a lot like long-term of like, oh, we could do this, we could kind of do that. And so I do think it is a little tricky to figure out what are the short-term things to kind of work on. I think one of the ones that I do like that we've kind of talked about that may be something substantive is working on some type of specific proposal, strategic proposal that is intended to be that like engagement with the community. And so I don't know if that's on like products, product strategy, or something, but maybe like a first example of how we could try to like delineate proposals from the community. I also think it's like actually important that we need to come up with like a name for like what this type of strategic proposal is, but maybe that's something that could be done or accomplished like in the shorter time frame.
Yes, I think that would be something that we could kind of brainstorm on and then bring suggestions to the community. Also circulating some sort of public document to get feedback on whoever wants to participate, and then post it to the forum. And just really just trying to create more clear timelines maybe with this kind of thing. Like, for example, something like this could be, we could post something once we start a week from that point, and talk about it at the next meeting, so we can kind of move a little quicker if people want to do it that way. So it's like we have it up, everyone can make their comments, and then we can kind of come to a consensus at the next meeting, something like that.
I have a random question. How did you find out about Dxdow?
So I think it was mentioned we're both sitting here, but we're DXT holders and rep holders. So we've known about it since its start, and crypto investors. So we're just aware of the community DeFi community as a whole.
All right, thanks.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's pretty cool. I think there's like a few opportunities here. Like one, like holding Dxdow accountable to becoming more decentralized and continuing to like lead in governance. I think there's a little bit of like a PR angle to that as well, and also kind of like keeping Dxdow informed on like what is the state of the art, what's going on in the world. And I know Chris does a great job of a lot of this stuff, but you could probably use some help. So
he definitely does, and I do think it could be more for fun. But we're hoping maybe even just to start kind of cataloging some of these articles that people keep throwing up on Keybase as maybe a resource for people when they're coming up to interesting topics, just to build off of that, and then add things we come up with, and maybe figure out some ways to like summarize things as interesting, pertinent topics come up that would be unique and helpful to our governance structures.
Yeah, I think catalog is a great word.
We've talked about like the Dxdow. If you combine everything in Keybase and the forum and these discussions, it's producing a shitload of content, right? Which is awesome content. A lot of it is governance and just sharing and publishing more of that governance content into the space. Dxdow will just stand out as the leader in it. It already is, but like no one knows, right? So just organizing that push of content, whether it's gathering or collating or whatever, it like that will help Dxdow's image a lot, I think.
Yeah, that's a great point.
My favorite example of this so far is kind of Gnosis, right? Gnosis DAO and someone without any knowledge like applied to work for Gnosis and use Dxdow's worker compensation guidelines. And that was only because like we have that documentation out there and we're talking about it. So I mean, yeah, I think this is something we could do a lot. And even returning to the previous conversation about DAOs deploying contracts, like the same thing there. I could see how other DAOs are kind of copying that, but it does all come down to like documentation for that. So, and so for the record, it is Machina, right? I remember that movie.
I think
Ex Machina, right?
Pulp, PM, whatever you prefer. One of us can be Pulp, the other one can be Machina. We don't care. whatever works. But yeah, if things come up, Keybase or a quick email or however people are communicating with each other aside from Keybase and Telegram with ideas, please send them our way, and it sounds like it should be fun.
Cool. Next, Keenan, I was hoping, just because we talk about onboarding a lot, and I know that we talked about this on Monday, but I just kind of, I thought you had some interesting comments on Monday during the biz dev call about the onboarding process. And I think this is kind of related to some of the things we're doing there. So I don't know if you could kind of briefly kind of talk about how your onboarding experience is gone so far and what you're kind of planning to do maybe in terms of documenting this.
Yeah, I just ask that you bear with me. I think my heater might have kicked the bed overnight. I am absolutely freezing right now, but I'll do my best. So yeah, I had a bit of piece on Monday discussing a bit of the process I went through, as Chris mentioned. Would anyone like me to highlight the problems again? I do recognize a lot of the faces here.
Maybe just what you see as the problems, like a couple sentence summary. Like I have in my mind what I think is the problem, but it would be good just to cause and effect.
Yeah, sure. I do have a couple bullet points regarding the issues I figured that were most pressing with the with the onboarding. So the first one, unless communicated by a community member, figuring out the next step can be needlessly difficult. And as a quick aside to this for you, Pulp, there is a document that I will link here that exists that I do think actually solves quite a few of the main issues I'll be bringing up. The main problem is we don't really have a location where this is accessible in my eyes. And actually, a lot of the points that I did make initially, I was unaware of this document. And so I kind of had to rehash and re-strategize based on that document. But that document, John, that document, I think touches on a lot of the issues I'm going to bring up. The second one is potential workers don't have reasonable means to identify Dxdow's current needs. Again, that document does solve it. And as I mentioned in my write-up I'm writing, currently the only place to find this document is Twitter when it is refreshed a couple times. And if you Google, Dxdow worker opportunities, it comes up. So more on that in a minute. Newly onboarded community members could be missing vital information regarding internal communication. Mizet and Sky have been touching on this a bit, and I will go into the solution in a moment. But regarding internal communication, we don't really have an avenue to know exactly who's doing what and where. It's kind of a learning curve, I suppose. So trial workers or newer workers or even part-time workers may not have enough experience to know who is doing what, where, when, how, why, and knowing when people are available is also incredibly important. Workers on a trial period may not have sufficient information regarding what is exactly expected of them. To the best of my knowledge, as a trial worker, I don't think there is really a guideline for what should be expected. Kind of just follow your proposal, I suppose, but documenting and laying out what that looks like could be really helpful. Because sometimes even I'm questioning exactly, is there going to be a performance review? We do have when you first onboard, you kind of meet up with some relevant community members. Could we have something related to that just to check up on our newer workers, especially in the non-technical fields where there isn't a GitHub or anything to, actively see what they're working on. Potential workers don't have solidified guidelines to follow concerning proposals, and this extends to current workers. I think we just were talking about that. Just having a layout to follow regarding the proposals would be really helpful. It would help with governance a lot too, I believe. Having a format and see, oh, this is what they have done. This is who their reference is. This is what they will be doing. Just in a line, you'll cut down the time it takes to read these proposals and fact check them, I think, considerably. And finally, just a little piece is trial workers may have difficulty with DXD compensation contracts depending on their field of expertise. Sky does have a document for this, but I couldn't really find it anywhere, which kind of lays back to my first point, is just a congregation of information. So what I am going to be proposing, and I'd like to discuss a couple of these points a little bit if possible, is having a worker information dashboard. And there was a bit of a confusion with, I believe, a couple of you, Zet, regarding what exactly this would look like. I'm not looking for to make this dashboard where the information will be stored, but rather the avenue where we can access the information. Zet has been big on the central source of truth, having, I believe, Gitbook and a couple other places to keep all of our information and have it solid in the background. I don't want that information, rehashed and becoming outdated on the front page. I just want there to be an avenue to be able to find these things, because right now it's just like you have to jump through hoops and it's just needlessly difficult. And just quickly, I will post the current, if I can find it, the current updated front page. A good place that we could keep it is under the Learn category that's been added. Literally just replacing worker compensation with even just workers and congregating all that information there. Because we kind of are already trying to do this by putting the worker compensation here. So replacing it with just a category specifically for workers and then having links to all that information in one place would be beneficial. Additionally, I think there needs to be a clarity pass-through or creation of worker documents. As I mentioned, the compensation guidelines need a touch, creation of the proposal guidelines and what that should look like. and the DXD vesting contract, tutorial, I suppose. These should be worked on, made a little bit more clean, and put somewhere accessible, as I mentioned, on the front page, perhaps. And the final piece would be creation and curation of an Airtable containing documentation designed to corroborate internal communication. And this is what me, Zet, and Sky have been discussing and working on a little bit, being Airtables or other internal measures for knowing who's doing what, when, where. As I mentioned, this will include eventually calendars for dates. We can have all of the information and everything in one place, I suppose, is what I'm getting at. And what I'm looking for right now for some discussion is I think the conversation that me, Sky, and Zet had was very important regarding the Airtable and how private or public we want to make it, because it will have our information. We have to decide how much information we want to share, and we also have to decide whether or not we want this to be entirely internal, or if we want this to be somewhere that a DXD holder could come in and see, oh, X is working on Y right now. I'd like to talk a bit about that today, if anyone has any input.
Those are great points. Before we kind of get into that, I just
all sounds good.
Yeah,
it's great to hear this, like somebody actually focusing on this, because it's like something that at least I know I feel all the time, like that we're not doing these things, but just like is not something that I've it's great to hear somebody actually focusing on it.
Thank you.
I guess to the specific question of kind of how do we have quote unquote internal documentation, and I think this is like just a tough problem. I guess I always maybe it's just me, but I'm kind of assuming that everything I do is out in the open. When I kind of get on these calls and I'm doing things, I kind of assume it's out in the open. So that's kind of the way that I'm operating, is if and so I don't know how we provide or kind of figure out how to kind of gather information but keep people protected and different. I think it's a tough problem.
So one example would be there is the beginnings of a potential partnership between Gnosis/Gnosis DAO and Dxdow, right? There are some points that both sides agree on, and there are other points that will be contentious, and will be negotiable, right? How does Dxdow position itself to look after the interests of Dxdow while forming a good partnership if everything is fully out in the open, right? All the details of those discussions and those negotiations will matter. So we can try to do it fully out in the open, but that's typically not how business deals get done. And so that's an example of how public should that internal discussion before speaking to the external party, how should that work?
Yeah, I think the analogy here is actually closer to diplomacy rather than business deals, right? So if the U.S. is going in and kind of negotiating a treaty with someone, you will have a team of people that are going to negotiate, and oftentimes those negotiations really will be secret, right? Or that's actually a big contention, is are those meetings going to be secret or not? But at the end of the day, the people negotiating are ultimately liable to the populace, or Senate, or wherever you want to get in the US. And I think you'd probably see something similar here, is that there may be private negotiations, but those people in those private negotiations know that ultimately this is going to have to come out and be public. So I don't know where we kind of make those distinctions, but to me, it's very much okay for individuals in Dxdow, contributors in Dxdow, to have engaging conversations that are private, and then select and then kind of decide how to unveil that or kind of release that to the public. I just don't know if we should have like Dxdow sanctioned like private conversations.
Well, right. So I think both Sky and Powers had really good points on this, because there is kind of like a joint front that you go into in like maybe a negotiation setting that you want to kind of say this is where everyone stands, and it's a little bit more it actually makes it easier just to work to the final whatever solution it is as far as collaborating with any third party. So yeah, I don't know how everyone else feels, but it could be useful, if it's more, because there needs to be some structure, right, as far as, with everyone's busy schedule, as to like when individuals or people who are actually negotiating this come together and talk about it, or would it just kind of organically happen that it's a private discussion, and then kind of when it happens, and like how productive would that be if it's not sanctioned, I guess? Or I don't know, that just the thought I would have is how effective it could play out that way.
Yeah, and I'm just agreeing with Martin that like the Gnosis, this whole discussion, it's just a perfect, manifestation of this problem, is like, or not problem, but situation. Like, how do we kind of move forward, talk about things, negotiate? And so, yeah, it's we'll see, I think, with Gnosis here.
I mean, we could just take the fully open DAO approach, right? This is not a private company. This is a open, decentralized collective. We could just try everything out in the open, which you can probably never come back from, and see how it goes. Like, it might work. At the end of the day, it has to be voted on by rep holders at the end of the day, whatever it is, right? So if everything's in the open, maybe that does work, as long as it's not like people's personal information that they don't want to share or something, right?
Are we not currently mostly in the open, having that Keybase is an open channel and most of our private documents are shared there?
Yeah, there basically are no private documents with Dxdow, right? Like, I mean, there can be private communications between individuals that are working with Dxdow, and I think, sometimes, there'll be meetings or whatever because people feel more comfortable like talking to the people they know in those contexts, but ultimately everything comes back to the public, right? Like, any private meetings are really just, some small group of people feeling more comfortable in that setting, producing something that will become public. So, I mean, in my view, it's like radical transparency is how this works. And like, all of this is going to be out in the open by necessity. But of course, it's like fine if some Gnosis devs and some Dxdow devs want to like put a Google Hangout together and only invite like the devs, like that's fine if that's easier and more comfortable for people to work out some details that they then later like present, right? Like, because you don't necessarily want to like hash all this stuff out and like put people on the spot in like a public recorded call and like every little detail, right? But I don't know. I guess it's totally possible for Dxdow to appoint a diplomat or something and allow them to go into some kind of closed door meetings and like have some, I don't know. Like, I just don't see a necessity really there, but I guess that's possible.
Yeah, I think it's important to be accountable to the public. And that's what I think about, like, with these calls and ultimately like votes in front of rep holders. Like, I may be talking to people about governance. I may be talking to people about other things that I'm kind of talking with them maybe privately about. But at the end of the day, like, I'm coming on this call, public call every week to talk about certain things. And like, that's public kind of for everyone. And that like holds us accountable. And like, if we're going to negotiate a thing, at the end of the day, like whatever deal it is, like rep holders will ultimately like approve or not approve. And so I'm less concerned, I guess, like for how the negotiations are conducted, but more about ensuring that there's like times that people or orgs like need to report to Dxdow, whether that be through public forums like this or like updates. I think we're doing this a little bit with the Gov 2.0 group, but we're providing updates to the community, and ultimately like kind of for rep holders. Yeah. Cool. Well, just wanted to kind of keep moving as we don't have that much time. Just kind of switching over to Gov 1.x and like Xdai. So Sky, I think I posted a competition. There was a community competition for Omen markets there. And I know there was some discussion about, I think, changing the time frame for how proposals can get approved. So I don't know if you wanted to give us an update here.
Yeah, this is the first example of a competition we were trying to do. And what happened is there seemed to be some urgency. So I tried to squeeze, without having all the information and details of how long a competition proposal takes and how the competition actually works, because we've never done one. I tried to like squeeze it into like set laid out dates in like a reasonable time frame, so the whole thing would take a week and a half or something. And because of that, you know, the proposal period to start the competition, which I thought was like 5 days, was really like more like 1 + 7 days. So it was 8 days. So like by the time the proposal passed, the period to enter for entrants to enter award markets into the competition had already passed. So I've redone it as a second try with the Dxdow mindset in place, which is don't try to squeeze things into too short period of time. So gave it, 8-9 days for the proposal to pass, which you can all go and vote on this. The good thing is Dxdow now has some Xdai in it, so spicing up the award with 100 Xdai as well as some Dxdow rep for the 3 winning markets. So once this proposal passes in 3.5 days, I think, if it passes and people vote on it, the competition will start. I have a post that will explain to the community the point of the competition. I haven't published it yet. And once we know this is going to pass, we publish that, and hopefully we tweet that out and spread it into like the greater community. And then we get all interested parties to submit their markets into this competition, which will last 5 or 6 days of entry. And then there will be a voting period. And it's timed up to end, the voting period to end just before Christmas. So it's like going behind. You can see the dates of the competition in this actual proposal if you click the Go to Competition button. So this will be hopefully a successful competition. And then once we know that it works and the timing of how things for a competition should be, we can do this in other cases, and any new ideas around marketing or bounties or other things as well, we can do more competitions. But that's my main concern still is not many people are looking at Dxdow, right? So the more money, someone said, the more money it has in there, if we put $100,000 in there, more people will look at it, right? And so the more action that's going on in that DAO, the more people will pay attention to it in addition to the mainnet DAO. And so that's kind of a big hurdle that needs to be overcome. And so it will be interesting to follow this competition and then hopefully expand it for future use cases too.
We need some version of like weak govern and prod or something, because I feel like what we're doing here is we're like trying out these new like systems. At the end of the day, it's like, well, we gotta like, the only way you can figure out what to do is by like actually just doing it and governing things. So I think that's kind of what's happening with Xdai, is it's just kind of been like a good iterative process to figure out exactly what we do. And I guess like just I was looking at the rep award. So how exactly does that work? Because I guess that's going to a specific address on Xdai, and like how do you distribute rep from that address, or is like rep on Xdai not transferable?
Sorry. Well, no. The rep and the award of 300 Xdai goes into like, I think, an escrow, a competition escrow, if this proposal passes, and then you have a percentage dividing between like a certain amount of winners, and so those are all entry fields in the competition scheme. So this is basically, if this passes, that rep will. Well, actually, you know what I should check is, where did the rep go from the first competition that passed but didn't take place? I don't know if that rep is sitting in the escrow or if that rep is still with Dxdow. Maybe Nylon will know the answer to that. Anyway, it goes into kind of an escrow, and then once the entries happen and then the voting of the competition happens, it should automatically go according to the top 3 winners of the vote. The rep and the Dxdow will automatically go to those 3 wallet addresses that win the competition. Like, it's automatic basically. But I don't know where the floating rep is from the last competition is.
So since rep is non-transferable, I suspect it's not sitting anywhere.
Well, so
yeah,
rep,
but technically this is probably working in some way though. Yeah.
So all rep sits, even mainnet DAO, the rep actually sits in the DAO. Like, if you look at the DAO holdings on Alchemy, the DAO is sitting in, all rep is sitting in the DAO. It's just assigned to people. So this would be the same thing. Like, new rep is created and it sits in the DAO, and it will be assigned to the 3 winners of the competition. The Dxdow will be transferred. Well, the Dxdow is also sitting on a contract and assigned to the addresses as well. But you don't have the option to transfer the rep, yes. But
yeah, the language is important, because like, I think even with ERC20 tokens, really what that is your address in a hash table on the token contract, right? So you don't, like, when you go to your wallet, like, it's not in your wallet, right? But it's useful to think of it that way from a UI perspective.
But you can change it. For Dxdow,
the key part with ERC20s is you can actually transfer them. With rep, you cannot. So I mean, I'm just making that distinction. Yeah.
But not even transfer. You're changing the ledger for the amount that's assigned to you, right? And in rep, you can't do that.
Right, like in an ERC20, when you transfer it, you're changing your ledger down and somebody else's like address up on that token contract. And with rep, you don't have the ability to do that. The DAO can change the ledger, but not you, not the owner of the rep.
Yeah, I mean, I think Dxdow is coming along. I mean, I think it just takes kind of these things to like learn and figure out how to govern out in the open. And I think there is a little bit of a fake it till you make it, right? In a way where we have to kind of like keep trying to kind of do things there. And I think the competition scheme is a good part of that. So.
And hopefully soon, when Omen is on Dxdow and then maybe Mesa is on Dxdow, there's going to be a lot more reason for people to look at and use and act on proposals and do proposals on Dxdow.
Mesa is on Dxdow, just for but Swapper, I think, Swapper and Omen, that will be like when we can get like our full product suite on Dxdow and actually start doing product things there. It'll be.
I mean, most of the stuff we're thinking is because of how Alchemy works. If we like, there's no reason to hide Dxdow stuff. From like, you don't need to be able to vote and such, but at least show the hash version of the Dxdow proposals, at least in a dashboard together with other stuff, and we can filter them out or something. I think like for us, the next step is just to control. Like, we're gonna have governance on Swapper, on Dxdow, what Augustus is working on, and on Alchemy. We don't want to have all these places to always like feel that we need to.
I was pushing Ezra that it should automatically just switch between Dxdow and mainnet when I switch my wallet address, but I think we're a little bit far from that due to the lack of connection and etc.
I think we should maybe be involved in what Augustus is building and make him think about that. We already talked with him about that. I think just don't split up the Dxdow stuff with the mainnet stuff. We don't want to have 2 more places to even look at, because then we have like 6 places to look at.
Yeah, like they should be distinguished, of course, right? And attention is important, but like it's really just why 2 websites to get the Dxdow governance stuff. And
it's already confusing. Like, there's a lot of people that thinks it's confusing. Where do you vote? Is DXD a voting token? Like, we already have like a education, like we need to educate our community and our DXD holders. So complicating it more with XDAI, mainnets, and new places to vote on, and swapper governance. Yeah, I think a governance dashboard, or at least taking control of governance, is our next steps here.
Yeah. And this was pretty like briefly mentioned by Kopelman on the Gnosis call yesterday, but he mentioned that they were going to be looking at DAO Stack for Gnosis DAO. And I think whether it's helping with DAO Stack stuff or just what Augusto is doing, like some kind of collaboration with Gnosis on the actual governance interfaces is a big,
for sure. Like everything that we're
opportunity.
doing
Yeah.
and struggling with, they're gonna struggle with. There's no reason that they should build their own stuff and we build our own stuff. We should definitely collaborate. Like whatever they don't know, but we know it.
I mean, I'm hoping they use the relayer for Swapper and the relayer for Gnosis protocol. Like, I assume that those are type of, infrastructure that they could use. And also when we do that, we kind of like, integrate with our own products more.
Yeah.
And then if Gnosis is using it, then it's like, well, another DAO will use it after that because, these two have used it. And then we're kind of like building just some nice flow from integrations.
Yeah.